Hey, good evening. I hope you had a really good day. I know most of you worked today and hope that went well. I hope your reading's going well. I'm a little behind on the grading. My apologies. I'm about to hit that this evening. And so we should be all caught up. Jumping right into where we left off last time with the historical books. Like any good historical, or historian rather, biblical historians typically also write uh, past the event that they're writing about. So you'll notice, for example, in Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings, there'll be phrases like, for example, in the early parts of Joshua, that those 12 stones that the tribes collected upon their crossing the Jordan, the writer says, and they're still there to this day. So the writer was writing from the vantage point of past the events, looking back at them. And like any good historian, he's trying to answer questions. So as we'll look at the questions a little bit as we go through. We open up with, of course, Joshua, and Joshua is a part of a collective history. Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. They're called the Deuteronomistic history, and the Deuteronomistic history seek to answer the question, why are we in exile? So it's all about pre-exilic times, which is the same kind of thing if someone today was to write, how did we, in 2008 financial collapse, how exactly did we get here? And we'd have to go back and begin analyzing things and movements and economic trajectories that got us to the 2008 debacle. In the same kind of way, I believe that the historian is in the exile writing and answering some of these questions. And some of the questions are significant questions that he helps out with. The historical books in the English Bible are kind of lined up together. And there are Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings, 1st, 2nd Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. And all those books are typically deemed in English Bibles as historical books. And so those are the ones we're going to go over. I'll check my notes real quick. The book of Joshua, as we're looking at here, is about the initial conquest into the land. If you will, it's kind of the ending of the Pentateuch. You got the Pentateuch itself, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, and then at the end of that you've got Joshua, which functions as the beginning of this brand new history as well. But it ends with the Pentateuch. The Pentateuch's main theme probably could be said to be something like the promise of the land to the fathers, and here you get land, and this is all about Israel's military conquest going into the land. Joshua sends spies into the land early on, and they bump into a prostitute named Rahab. Rahab turns out to be extraordinary with regards to her knowledge of who Israel's God is, and Rahab is the sole survivor of the Jericho assault. From that point forward, Joshua goes in and conquers the northern and southern corridors and the central corridors of all of Canaan, and wipes them out, and begins to try to apportion the land. One of the things that's really interesting about the apportioning of the land that you might find interesting, I find it interesting, is the fact that in the ancient Near East, always, the only people that own land are either the kings or the aristocracy. That's it. Nobody else owns land. But in Israel, you read from and you won't be able to read much of it. I mean, most people really flounder trying to read through chapters 13 through 22. It's a little bit difficult, but go through and just peruse it. Peruse it and check out who's getting land. I'll tell you, every single family is getting land, and that is very unusual. That'll sneak up on Israel in a bit. Actually, we'll look at it actually in Kings. I'll just give you a story when we get to Kings that you can look at and kind of see the result of land in that sense, and how it's doled out in Israel. But every family gets it, which have been really unusual. As every family gets it, then several things are said about the covenant. If you go to chapter 21 of Joshua, for example, Joshua goes ahead and he says, God says through Joshua rather, to Israel, I have given you all that I promised Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Everything. I've given all of it to you. Not one of my promises has failed. Probably what he means by that, or particularly, is the land. That is the land. So now the land is Israel's to lose, and in fact they do lose it. They lose it. And you get the hint that they're going to at the end of Joshua chapter 24. The much crocheted "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord" is followed by Israel saying, "We will too. We'll serve the Lord too." And Joshua said, "You probably won't." And they say, "Well, why? Well, how could you possibly say that?" And Joshua says, "You have had the gods of your fathers with you." So probably little teraphim. Teraphim were like household idols. You've had these household idols with you from beyond the river and from Egypt. So this is beyond the river is Abraham. So the culture that they've emerged from is still defining in large part their perception of God and the perception of how they interact with God. And of course, this is going to bite them significantly in the future. Joshua knows this, and he says, you can't, as long as there's idolatry among Israel, you'll never be faithful. Well, they said that they would, but the next book demonstrates that they would not. Judges, the book of Judges, is all about this horrible cycle of sin, oppression, and deliverance. And one of the great things out of it is it demonstrates, the historian that writes this is almost setting you up. He's setting you up at the end of the book. He says, in those days there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And so it sets up the reader to say, what we need is a king. Really what the historian wants you to observe, though, is no king can get you out of this cycle of sin and oppression and deliverance. So the cycle, as you see it on the screen, is the children of Israel would do what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Their sin prompts God to be angry, and God raises up typically a foreign nation or a warlord or something like that to come in and dominate them, whether that's the Philistia, which had a full-blown military aristocracy of its own, or there's warlords from Midian or something like that. And they would come in and dominate them. And during the oppressions, the Israelites would cry out to the Lord, and the Lord would hear their cry and raise up a hero or a deliverer, and the deliverer would deliver. And then everything seemed to be great, but then at the death of the deliverer, and sometimes even before the death of the deliverer, the whole cycle would start over again. The children of Israel would do what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and everything was done kind of almost like theological political anarchy. It's interesting enough, it starts like right at the beginning, Judges chapter 2, around verse 10. If you read that, it says that Joshua and his entire generation would gather to their fathers, which means that they were simply they were dead and buried. And then it says, and there arose another generation who did not know the Lord or any of the works of his hands that he had done for Israel. Well, I was at a parenting conference one time, and the guy that running the parenting conference, I used that passage that was going to be the parenting conference passage, and the problem, and so he said the problem is you don't tell your kids the stories. You don't tell your kids the stories. But if you just flip on a little bit further to the Gideon narrative, Gideon is talking to the angel of the Lord, and Gideon says, "We know the stories. We just don't buy them. We don't believe them." I told you that the idolatry that Joshua warned them about would eventually bite them. One of the kind of the takeaways, I mean, the morals of maybe the historians trying to teach is idolatry always whittles away at genuine faith, if you will. It's almost like if you go to a restaurant and like Red Robin, that has these amazing fries, and I could actually eat. They keep on bringing me these baskets of fries. I just nibble away at fries. They bring me my meal, and I'm completely full. I don't have any. I had no room for my my blue ribbon burger, and so in the same kind of way, idolatry whittles away at your affections to where you have no capacity or appetite to really believe anything huge, anything big, anything tasty. And so in the same kind of way, this has happened seemingly to Israel, and it's gotten them in this extraordinarily bad spot. Now, in a Hebrew Bible, the order of the historical books is Joshua, Judges, Samuel, Kings. But in the English Bible, you've got this amazing story right in the middle of it. I think David Platt's going to preach. I think you're listening to a sermon this week. You're going to love the sermon. Platt's a great preacher, and this is a great sermon on Ruth. Ruth is set in the time of the judges, in the very opening of the text. And in the midst of the text, what you have is this movement of this family, Elimelech's family, and he and his wife, Naomi, leave Bethlehem, and they go to Moab in order to survive. There's a big famine in Bethlehem. And interestingly enough, when they get there, Elimelech and his two sons, Machlon and Chilion, don't last the entire first chapter. Machlon and Chilion grow up, they get married, and then they die. And we're not really told how they die or why they die, but all three guys die, and there's 3 women left. Well, in the ancient world, that's just not a good equation. And so Naomi hears that now there's bread back at Bethlehem, and so she's going to head back home. And as she goes, she tries to go anyway, she tells her one daughter-in-law, Orpah, not to be confused with the talk show host of the slightly different name, Orpah, she tells Orpah, you go back to your mother's house. You're still young enough. You can marry, have a family. Orpah says, okay, and bolts. She tells Ruth the same thing, and Ruth says no. And in fact, she makes this pronouncement, and this gets crocheted as much as Joshua 24 does. But this is actually a really serious pronouncement. She says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your God will be my God. Your people will be my people." This is a full-blown conversion, if you will. And she heads back. We're introduced, in the second chapter, after they get back, introduced to Boaz. And Boaz is a wealthy family member of Elimelech's, and he falls for Ruth. And Ruth is treated very well when she goes out to glean in the field, and Boaz makes sure that she gets the best that's left over, and then loads her up with food as you go back home. And Naomi is thrilled and immediately jumps on trying to create a relationship between Boaz and Ruth, and dolls Ruth up rather to go and meet Boaz at the threshing floor, which is after every harvest they would celebrate at the threshing floor, eating and drinking, and they would just, all the guys that had been working through the harvest would just crash right there at the threshing floor, and it was a big celebration. And Ruth went and snuggled up next to Boaz, letting him know that she had chosen him, and he is thrilled because she's apparently beautiful and young and vibrant, and so he's absolutely thrilled that she chooses him, and so he chooses her back. And through an interesting interaction with another party that could actually take Ruth from him, he ends up with Ruth and marries Ruth. Now the great thing about this is you've got the a story of real redemption and hope here. You begin the story with no land and no seed, right? No kids, and no real blessing for the nations. So all the 3 major covenant things you don't have at the beginning of the story. But as you move through the story and get to the end, then you get land. Ruth now lives with Boaz. Plenty. She goes into the land just like Israel had. You get seed. She now has a son, and that son is in the line of David, and that's a big deal if you're an Israelite to read something like this. This is the great-great-grandma of David. And then you also have blessing to the nations, because in the Davidic king would lie not just simply blessing for Israel, but blessing for all people at some point. In the covenant with Abraham would lie not just blessing for Israel, but every family of the earth would be blessed in the seed of Abraham. And so this all of this comes to fruition here by the end of the book of Ruth. When next video come back, we will jump right on to the next book.